Okay, welcome back everybody. This is part 2 of the Day of the Dead tutorial, Woman with Her Face Painted. And we left off about here. I'm going to be adding some more techniques and finish up with something that looks similar to this. Let's get started. Okay, so at this point, I am going to start adding some lighting, some blue kind of lighting to the highlights on her face, neck, and eyes. All right, and I'm going to do that by adding a brand new layer. Let's click on the brand new layer, and I'm going to call this layer Blue Lights. All right, to begin, I'm just going to paint some blue lights with the paintbrush tool, and to make it look more integrated into her face, more realistic, I'm going to change the layer blending mode after I do some painting. So I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to add some kind of bluish light here, since that's a complement of orange, over on the highlights. All right, so I'm going to choose my blue. All right, you can do, a turquoise or a navy blue. All right, I think I might do 2 different layers of blues just to see what it looks like. I'm going to get my paintbrush and drop down my brushes. All right, and you can choose a soft brush if you want it to be kind of feathery on the ends, or a hard brush if you don't want it to feather, you want it to have a hard edge to your lighting. I'm going to start with the hard edge, and then later I am going to blur it. All right, so now, oops, here's one of my marigold pictures we'll be working with. All right, so I'm on a new layer, and I've got my hard round brush, and I've got some blue as my paint, and I'm going to zoom in and just paint some blue here on the edge of her face. All right, kind of following some of the highlights that are already there, but thinking about the light source coming from the left. All right, and right now my opacity was kind of low. I'm painting at about 84%. Okay, and in a moment, I am going to blur this. So it is okay that it looks a little bit chunky, because I'm going to blur it out and soften it up. All right, so I'm kind of looking for areas of nice highlight to just add this blue light. And I'm going to make my brush smaller and add some little details on areas that might have highlights, even some kind of on the lips and the eyes. And kind of just using the areas that already had light on them. Okay, so that's kind of my first round of highlights. And what I'm going to do now is blur them. So I'm still on my blue lights layer, and I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. So Gaussian Blur is a blur that blurs every pixel softly. All right, make sure to click Preview, and then you can increase or decrease the radius and see what it looks like. So see, now it's really blurred out, and it looks a lot softer. The only problem with the blur is that it's going to blur outside of her face. So later I'm going to go back in and kind of erase some of those. So that's a lot softer. All right, so now I'm going to zoom back in and erase some of the areas that blurred too far off of her face. And in a moment, I'm going to go back in with a little bit of a kind of a turquoise green and add a little layer of lighting with turquoise too. All right, and I kind of lost the blue on her eyes. That really blurred out a lot. So I'm going to add another layer and call that blue light eyes. And I'm going to add some more blue to the eyes. And when I blur it, I will blur less this time. I want kind of like a little glow effect happening on her eyes after I blur it. All right, so now I'm going to just blur just the eyes and a little bit of the nose. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur. Okay, so last time 45 was way too much. I don't want it to blur that much. Okay, kind of like that on 10. And then to make it look a little more realistic, I am going to drop the opacity a little bit. And then now I'm going to play with my layer blending modes. So you can just go ahead and see darken looked kind of good. Multiply. All right, so just scroll through your layer blending modes and see if that helps the blue glow look a little interesting. Like color dodge, linear dodge looks good. Overlay's very subtle. Even linear light looks kind of interesting for a really glowy effect. Okay, and you can do this as many times as you want. So I could add another layer. I think this time I'll call it my green light. And I'll choose kind of a greenish turquoise and add another layer of light just to really build that kind of glowy effect. Okay, remember it doesn't have to, I'm painting small, but it also doesn't have to be perfect because now I'm going to go and blur it. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur. All right, and then check, how much do you want it to blur without totally losing the blur, losing the color. Okay, so I like that turquoise glow that happened right there on her face. I could leave it like this, or I can play around with my layer blending modes. I think I got too much blur on the nose, so I am going to erase a little bit on the nose. All right, so now I can keep it like that, or I can lower the opacity to make it, less visible, or I can play around with my layer blending mode. Do I want to change how it interacts with the layer below it? Let's see what it looks like on linear light. Okay, liking that, really glowy. I think I might actually add some right here on the side of the jaw. So I'm going to add another layer because I don't want to keep blurring my previous ones. And make my brush a little bit small, a little bit larger. And if you really want to get more detail oriented, then get your eraser, and before you blur it, kind of sharpen those edges, have them taper off. Looks a lot more sophisticated. All right, I'm going to blur this. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur. And depending on how hard you want the light to be, increase or decrease the radius of the blur. All right, and then you can, of course, reduce the opacity of this brand new layer and also change the layer blending mode. So if you really want that intense glow, linear dodge is working. You could try vivid light. That's always good, and linear light too. Maybe I'll try vivid light for that one. All right, and I think I might reduce the opacity a little. Okay. All right, next I'm going to start adding some flowers and butterflies. So I have opened some of those up that I got from stock photo sites, including this one and these. All right, so I'm just going to be using my quick select tool to select individual flowers. And I'm going to copy it, Command C or Control C, and then paste it. And keep in mind that when you paste it, you need to start a new layer. So I'm going to call this new layer Flower 1 and paste it on my new layer. It's really small. So I'm going to make it larger. Control T or Command T gets you to free transform. And I'm just going to play around with kind of integrating some of my marigolds into my already made flower crown here. So I want this to look more like the roses, and the roses have kind of a less saturated look. So first off, I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments, Hue, Saturation, and just kind of play around with desaturating just a tad so it doesn't look so much brighter than the roses. I want to, I do want to keep some of that. So I'm going to just reduce the lightness just a little bit. Next, I'm going to give it a drop shadow since the roses have some shadows underneath them. Layer, layer style, drop shadow. Okay, right now my drop shadow is going, the angle, it says the light source is coming from the upper left, and there's the drop shadow to the right. That does look pretty good next to the roses. I could play around with the angle of my shadow, put it more underneath. I could also play around with the size of it, make it larger. So if you can see, there's the black, more of the black showing, or spread it out more. Okay, good. All right, now I'm going to go back to my marigolds and select a different marigold. First, I've got to deselect what I have so far. Okay. And I'm going to copy it and go to make a new layer, and I'm going to call this Flower 2. And now I'll paste it and free transform, make it a little bit bigger. All right, so I do want to play around with making some of the flowers smaller, making some of the flowers bigger. All right, have some variation in size. All right, and now I want that same effect of a little bit lower in saturation. So back to image, adjustments, hue, saturation. Just decrease it a little bit. Okay, and now I want the same drop shadow effect. I don't have to redo it. All I'm going to do is copy my effect to the next layer. So I will, here's my effect from my flower, and it says FX. I'm going to copy it to the next layer. I'm going to hover on the FX, hold down Option, click, drag it, drop it up. And now I've copied the same effect to the other flower. All right, and so I'm just going to do that a couple times, switching between different flowers so that I get different viewpoints, make it look more realistic. And in a moment, I'm going to add some of these kind of around her shoulder. All right, now I copied and pasted that on the same layer as the other one. That's why it already got the effect. Okay. All right, now what I'm going to do is just kind of duplicate a couple of these. So I'm going to go down to my original one and I'm going to duplicate it. You can duplicate the layer, or you can, with your move tool, hover on the flower, hold down Option, click and drag. All right. This one. And I'm just kind of bringing some down to her shoulders, and I'm going to play around with rotating them and resizing them so it doesn't look like I'm using the same flower over and over again. All right, so I'm just going to Control T or Command T to resize the flower, shrink it. All right, and then they're kind of getting strangely stacked, so you can play around with their stacking order. Leave that one in the back. Yeah, that one's on the top. Okay. All right, I think I'll go for one more. And resize it. Control T for free transform. And maybe rotate. Okay, next I'm going to go get some butterflies. So I've already opened up this butterfly that I found on a stock photos, and I've selected it with my quick select. I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to make a brand new layer for it above all my flowers and call it the butterfly layer. And I'll paste it, Command V or Control V. All right, and I'm just going to play around with adding that, and I definitely want a cast shadow to my butterfly. So let's go to Layer, Layer Style, Drop Shadow. All right, I think I want this to definitely be smaller, so I'm going to reduce the size and the spread. Okay, and I'm just going to play around with adding some different kinds of butterflies. All right, I've also got this blue butterfly. I'm just going to select it with my quick select. All right, I'll copy it, Command C or Control C. And let's go back to my document. All right, I'm going to make a brand new layer. I'm going to call this blue butterfly. And I'll paste it, Command V or Control V. So you can see I've been using a lot of blues and a lot of oranges. I'm going to put that right there. Okay, and I'm going to give it a little bit of a cast shadow. Layer style drop shadow. All right, this is my default that I've been using. I can sort of see it on her hair. That's good. If you want it to be more visible, increase the size or the spread. All right, and I think I've got another butterfly on my desktop. I do, this one right here. So I'm going to go ahead and open that in Photoshop. I'm going to click it, drag it, drop it onto my Photoshop icon. You can also right click on it and say open with Photoshop, or just go to Photoshop and open it there. And this has a white background. So what I'm going to do is get my magic wand tool. I'm going to click on the background, and now it's selected the background and not the butterfly. I'm going to inverse this, select inverse. And now the butterfly is selected. So I can copy it and go back to my document. I'm going to make a brand new layer again. This will be my third butterfly. Okay, and paste. There we go. And move it around. Whoops. And I'm going to give it that cast shadow again. Drop shadow, layer style, drop shadow. Okay, so from here I can keep adding more flowers, more butterflies. I could add some hummingbirds. I think I'm also going to add a little bit of a border of kind of stylized leaves. So I went to Brush Easy and I downloaded a new brush. So I'm going to go to my brush tool, drop down my brushes, and I downloaded a brush called Ivy, 20 different Ivy brushes. And if you click on them, you can see when I hover, there's a lot of different kinds. All right, so I'm just going to play around with adding some of those. So I'm going to add a brand new layer and call it my Ivy brush. And I'm going to sample, use my eyedropper and maybe sample some of the blues that I've been seeing in my butterfly and in that shirt. Okay, and now this brush is pretty large. I'm going to stamp it as part of the kind of make a frame out of it. And right now I'm at 100% flow, but I'm at 84% opacity. How about I'm going to put that up to 100, and then I'm going to reduce the opacity of the whole layer just to make it feel a little less hard. Now, right now I've got it, the brush is definitely, vertical up and down. And I've stamped it once like that. I think I'm going to go over here and kind of lead it off the page here. But now I want the brush to look different, so I'm going to flip it. I'm going to click on my brush presets right here, brush settings, and I'm going to take the brush and I'm going to flip it 180. Okay, I'm going to close that, and then I'm going to flip it upside down right here for some nice kind of scroll work. All right, and then I'm going to reduce the opacity of this layer. And if you want, you can play around with, your layer blending modes. Color dodge looks kind of nice. Oh, and if I want it to kind of match the oranges, divide worked out really well. I'm going to choose color dodge. All right, and then I'm just going to continue doing that How about ivy brush 2? And add a little bit more of a frame. I'm going to go choose a different brush. Okay, that one's got kind of a nice look to it. All right, this time I'm going to change my color a little bit, and I am going to sample a little bit of the orange from the butterfly. All right, and I'm just going to layer on a different brush. And I think I'll go ahead and open up those brush settings again and flip it. All right, and then I'll play around with the layer blending mode. Color looks good. Right now I'm on normal. I think I'm going to reduce the opacity and see. I might just leave it on normal. I want it to kind of stand out. Okay, so from here, I'm just going to keep experimenting with adding some floral patterns for a frame, maybe add some more flowers and a hummingbird. I could also go in and, paint some of the hand-painted flower petals with some of the reddish orange. All right, that's the end of part 2.